You're up.
Hello there. I'm just gonna click show screen and hope it picks the right one.
Yes,
Did that?
it
Excellent. That's fantastic. Great. In which case, I guess I'll jump right in. So first, I want to say Lucy just did a really great talk, and about my eye generally on first was One Night Stand for a little while now because. Both me and Lucy's game were featured in a free games of the week on Rock Paper Shotgun in 2016 when she first launched that game. So generally, she's always been on my radar, and she gave a fantastic talk just now about things that I'm very interested in. I am Gary Kings, lead designer at National Insecurities, and we are best known for making Disorient on the Murder Express, 2001: A Space Felony, and Once Upon a Crime in the West. The last two were funded by Humble, and if you are subscribed on Humble on the monthly service, then you already own those games. You can just go straight onto Humble Trove. If not, then you can pick them up on itch. 2001 is actually pay what you want right now, and I'll be talking about that a lot in this talk, which is about murder mysteries. So play along with me here. Think of a detective game. Now, chances are you're thinking of an adventure game. You've probably got to look for clues. There's probably dialogue options. And there's probably not a lot of direct deduction. And what I mean by that is that a lot of the events will fold out before you. You'll find clues, you'll talk to people, and things will present themselves and often be vocalized by the characters on screen. You might be guessing along with them or sort of influencing their path, especially through dialogue options. But often the actual heavy parts of deduction are not really what the game is trying to simulate. And there isn't actually anything wrong with that, I promise. Instead, it's a lot like how movies work, right? So if you're quite passive in the deductive kind of process, then you're just kind of going along for the ride, and you get to experience a lot of the plot twists. And sometimes when you guess correct early on, that might be validated later. That is also very satisfying. And there is a good reason why games are made this way, and part of it is because actually designing deductive mechanics is an absolute nightmare, as I have discovered several times. But this is kind of the default in the medium, and that is a lot of what prompted me to make the games that I did. But let's talk about a couple of other examples that aren't mine first. So, first of all, Disco Elysium came out last year, won a bunch of awards. You might have heard of it. In a lot of ways, it actually works a lot like what I just described. You are poking around for clues, you are talking to people, you've got dialogue trees, and you don't actually have that much of a hand in the deductive process of it. However, it does manage to sidestep the downside of not giving the player much agency by being a very in-depth RPG. It has a traits system, where you can pour skill points into various different traits, which will give you different skills and kind of just shape how your detective goes through this thing. So if you put points into visual calculus, for example, you'll be able to see what happened at a crime scene just by looking at it, maybe map out potential trajectories of bullets, that sort of thing. And that's then information which you can then use in dialogues with other characters. So you'll have information that you then use in those dialogues. And in those dialogues, you might have put points into drama, and you'll be able to tell when people are lying to you and use that information against them. But if you didn't put your points into visual calculus or drama, then you might wind up at a lot of the same truths, but through different skills. You can put in skills that make you more threatening, to different people. And this kind of allows you to get to the same place, but in different ways. So it doesn't have you driving the deduction, but it does still give you expression. And that is a really interesting way of approaching it that I personally never would have thought of. And when I saw it, I was like, wait, this feels like an impossible game. So that was a nice surprise, well worth checking out. Return of the Obra Dinn is the exact opposite of that. This is a game that gives you an incredible amount of deductive agency. It has a lot of mechanics, so you're put on this ship and you've got to work out how everybody died. So you've got this big ledger with all the crewmates' names in it, and it's like you need to work out who each body is, how they died, if they were murdered, who were they murdered by, and with what kind of murder weapon. This guy here that you're seeing is getting his face slashed with a knife, and it's like you have to work out all of these details, and every single part of that process. This person is called this, they were killed by this person here with a knife. All of those elements, a bit like Cluedo or something, have a mechanical expression within there to for you to express what you believe happened. Unfortunately, and this is a bit of a hot take because the game won 1 billion awards, well deserved. Unfortunately, the sheer scope and ambition of it does lead to a few shortcomings. So occasionally you will know what happened. You'll think you know what happened at least, and you're not quite sure how to express it to the game because the sheer scope of the vocabulary that it has to offer you, sometimes literally in the case of the words it uses for the ways people died, like is this person impaled or stabbed, that kind of thing. So sometimes you'll be like, am I expressing this correctly? And you won't really know until things click into place. That means that the puzzle is sometimes wrestling with the game mechanics and not with the puzzle itself, and that can be a bit of a problem. Interestingly, the 2016 GDC demo had a much smaller scale and did not have these issues. It only had about 7 murders that you needed to solve, and there was a much, much tighter scope. It was still very expressive. It was still this guy killed by this, with this weapon, that kind of thing. But it was a little bit... the fact that it was a demo meant that most of the mechanics that are in the full game actually weren't present yet. And so when the full game comes along and it has its expanded scope, it also has the expanded scope of mechanics to create that kind of variety to accommodate its scope. And with that comes a few of those shortcomings. But like I said, every bit of praise that it's got is absolutely earned, and I absolutely adore this game. The only problem is I haven't actually completed it because it felt a little bit like homework because of the games that I've worked on. Just it's hard to enjoy these kinds of games when you make them, unfortunately. So I've talked about not enough deduction, and I've talked about too much deduction. So what's the right amount of deduction? Well, Ace Attorney. Ace Attorney is good, but you already know this. So there's this brilliant moment in Ace Attorney which is built up to several times, and you could argue that this game is largely built to ramp up to this same moment over and over again, and that is there's a suspect on the podium or a witness, and they're giving their statement, and it is your job to find a contradiction within that statement and present evidence against it. And you get this great moment that Lucy talked about with the pointing and objection, which, by the way, makes a fantastic text tone notification noise. So yeah, this is this little triumphant moment. What it gives you is you are expressing a very, very complex idea. I think this person is lying, and here's why, but with a very, very mechanically simple expression. You literally just point at the piece of evidence that you think contradicts. And this has been very influential on my career, as you're about to find out. So in each of our 3 games, we tried to approach murder mysteries in different ways. So Disorient on the Murder Express, it's very much about the theatrics of deduction. You're pacing around with your whiskey and pointing at things. 2001: A Space Felony is effectively a court drama in space, so that's actually the most Ace Attorney of them. And then Once Upon a Crime in the West is more of a sort of like cozy, character-focused murder mystery, which focuses on non-linear storytelling and nailing things to walls, which is a very detective-y thing. However, you can boil down all 3 games to being an elaborate game of Snap, a little bit of clever writing, some unclever jokes, and pretty set dressing. Check them out on it. I'm going to focus on 2001: A Space Felony for pretty much the reason I already stated, is that it's the most focused on what I'm talking about today, and it's probably our most successful example as well. Once Upon a Crime in the West had its own ambitions, which kind of took a little bit of the focus off this, and Disorient on the Murder Express was kind of a bit of a first pass, smaller in scope. This kind of hit the balance really nicely. So 2001: A Space Felony is you turn up onto a spaceship which has gone dark, lost communication with Earth, and everybody on board is dead. And the AI has got a very suspicious sounding story about what happened. So it's your job to go around, find the evidences, snap pictures, and use those pictures as evidence to get statements and contradictions. present contradictions to those statements. So you're effectively asking Mal, what do you think of this piece of evidence? And he'll tell you something which is probably a lie. And then you use another piece of evidence to contradict that lie. Very much Ace Attorney. An example of this would be if you asked him, hey, there's this bloody-faced astronaut outside the ship. His helmet's cracked. What happened? And he'll say, well, he was attacked by a crew member with a wrench. And you will present in response the sort of robotic arm of a vehicle as evidence against that, because it has blood all over it. And you're like, I think this is the... I believe that this is the murder weapon instead. He'll fire back against that. He'll say, well, that only offers an alternate hypothesis. It doesn't actually disprove what I have to say. So you then need to find another piece of evidence that disproves him, and therefore proving that your hypothesis is correct and that he was in fact killed by a vehicle. And then on top of that, once you've proven it was the vehicle, you have to prove that Mal was in control of that. In control of the vehicle rather than another person, as he claims. And so what we've effectively done is we've created very, very complex conversations between you and the game, but with only two verbs, and that is statement and contradiction. The 18 pieces of evidence all work like snap cards in your elaborate game of Snap, and it's roughly designed to recapture those sweet objection fields. Puts the deductive process in your hands without being too complicated about it. The main thing that I think that we wanted to do here was we took Ace Attorney and we were like, well, what if the game didn't present you with this person is lying, figure it out. Instead, you were the one that prompted them to lie to begin with. So you were in control of both elements of that, both the statement and the contradiction. You can start that conversation with any piece of evidence and try and contradict it with any other piece of evidence. So that's how we kind of built that from there. And you kind of you've got to sort of sort through the evidence and present them to them as you go, unfolding the story. And there is no one path through that. You can go through that any way you like. This was, of course, an absolute nightmare to write. So here's a few things that we learned, and these are the kind of things that can very much apply to a lot of what you might be writing if you want to write some kind of mystery stuff. Effectively writing a murder mystery game, at least the way that we do it, is you need to try and tell the players the answers and make them think that it was their idea. You need to make these puzzle pieces fit for a start, which is, that's the easy part, I suppose. But the hard part is trying to actually get the player to think about these two things at the same time. So say you've got a connection between a bloodied sweater and a broken telephone. You've got to try and get the player to make the connection between those two. But the problem is they don't seem all that connected until you think about them at the same time. How can you trick them into thinking about them at the same time? Well, first of all, you can just put them really close together. But honestly, that's really cheap, really easy. And it's honestly makes it less satisfying to solve that because the player can tell why they connected that. They can tell it's because you just stuck them close together. And what you're trying to do here is trick them. So there is actually a case to be made for putting them further apart, breaking that line of sight between them. However, if they are really, really struggling, then you can just try and make that line of sight work. Try making them look similar. Now you can just literally make them the same color if you want to, but getting really clever about this. Getting really clever about this means that you can just like use accented colors, or you can have like, say for example, a broken cord of the telephone. It looks a lot like one of the loose threads of the sweater. You can just make those two things shape the same, and so that'll kind of trick the human brain into bringing up that other piece of thing that they saw that shape in, and then they'll make the connection. They'll be like, I am a genius. And those are the kinds of things that you want to nudge at. You don't want to literally like have someone paint an obscure symbol on both of them just so they make the connection, although that is an option if literally everybody is missing it. But honestly, if they're just missing it that much, then you might want to go back to the writing, which is what I'm going to talk about here. So sometimes you don't want to use any visual things. Maybe your game isn't actually all that visual to begin with. Maybe it's very, very text-based. But yeah, so sometimes you actually need to go back into the writing, and sometimes that means that you can give a little bit more information away, but you don't always have to. If you take a sentence that talks about the bloodied sweater and the sentence that talks about the telephone, and you just kind of make them sound similar, they have a similar amount of syllables, they have kind of similar sounds within them in the same places, kind of make the sentences rhyme. That can be that little push that the player needs to be thinking about them at once, because their brain goes, hang on a minute, I've heard this before, but they haven't really. So if you kind of pay attention to the rhythm of the sentence, the amount of syllables, the actual words that are involved, use similar adjectives, some of the kind of words that build around keywords rather than the keywords themselves. Just try and work to make them sound similar. If the game is voiced, then you can focus on having the performance of those dialogue lines that surround those objects be similar as well. Pay attention to cadence, rhythm, all of those kinds of things. I've put here, make them rhyme if you have to. I was sat there writing 2001: A Space Felony, going insane trying to like write them like haikus. Eventually I kind of gave up and got a little bit simpler about it, but that is the kind of path that you can go down, and if you really need to, is just make them rhyme. Now these things are just difficulty modifiers in the end, so when you, especially if you're testing the game, a lot of it is guesswork, and then you throw it at the players and see what works, and some things work for some people and some things don't work for others. But if you find that it's overall a little too hard, then you can lean into certain aspects of it. But the biggest difficulty modifier of all, and also the hardest to modify in my experience, is the scope of the overall thing. That's a lot of guesswork. So initially we designed 2001: A Space Felony to have 14 pieces of evidence, and it worked fine enough, you know. And then we were like, all right, well, we have this spare room which we haven't used in the ship, so we're going to fill it with another branch of the mystery. And we built in this extra section on the side, which actually slotted in just perfectly fine. That added 4 extra pieces of evidence. However, the overall, adding this piece of the mystery to the overall mystery, we didn't actually alter any of the content of the rest of the game, but the very inclusion of 4 new pieces of evidence made the overall game harder, because you're adding 4 more cards to that snap deck. You are asking the player to retain more information and sort more information. You're filling the container that is their brain with just a few more things, and that does raise the difficulty of the entire thing. So be careful about how much information you're asking the player to sort through, and how much you're really asking of them, you know. A second thing is, things should only be as difficult as they are interesting. That extra bit that we added, that branch, I did originally design to be the hardest part of the game, a lot like the example I gave earlier, where Mal is arguing back at you and you have to keep sending him other pieces of evidence to kind of catch him off guard, prove different parts of the mystery before you get him to confess. I designed it to be like that. It only had 4 pieces of evidence in it, and it used another piece of evidence that I had already got from the rest of the game. So it was like 5 constructed out of 5 pieces of evidence, and it was really, I was like, yeah, I'm going to make this the most ambitious piece of the mystery. But the problem is that people just weren't engaging with it on that same level as the other one, because the other one prompted the question, what happened to this astronaut? His face is all busted up. His suit is ruined. What happened here? Meanwhile, the piece of content that I added prompted the question, why is this emergency door open? And I promise it leads to some really interesting answers, but the initial driving question did not warrant the kind of attention that the game then asked players of it, and therefore it made it way harder than it needed to be. So things should only be as difficult as they are interesting. So if you're going to make something really elaborate, make sure it's like a dude with 20 knives sticking out of his ear or something. In the end, it's all guesswork. It's not like these difficulty modifiers, they're not quite as simple as like adding 20% more health to the player to make the game 100% better, so they have that little bit of extra wiggle room and they're not dying constantly. It is a matter of just like guessing it out, guessing what it is, and then just you kind of have to land on a lot of the right answers early and kind of by accident, and then just sort of nudge it into place from there with a lot of the ways that I've described, altering the visuals. We did that a lot in ours. There's a lot of visual things, altering some of the writing so things match up. and a little bit of the scope as well. So the actually adding 4 pieces of evidence did end up working in our favor because it made it more difficult in a good way. But if we added any more, that would have definitely been bad, I think, diminishing returns. And I say here, don't bother, but absolutely do bother. If you want to make a murder mystery game with a little bit of extra deduction in it from your average, I absolutely encourage it. I absolutely encourage to steal from any of the examples that I've listed here, including my own. Check out our games. Check out Disco Elysium and Obra Dinn, and just like try and break a little bit of new ground in the industry. Or even if you don't, then there just aren't enough games, in my personal opinion, like this anyway. And I would love to see more of them. So absolutely dive feet first into this and just see what happens. It's a nightmare, but it's a wonderful nightmare. And I believe that's all. That's all from me. I've been Gary Kings, and there's my handle. Look us up on Google. And I think it's question time, right?
Yeah, it's question time. All right, so I'm ready to do questions. Oh my god, this chat is scrolling. What are some types of deduction mechanics that you wish you'd see more often in the genre?
Ooh, I actually do think that I would love to see more of what Obra Dinn does, if I'm honest, because that was so immensely ambitious that it's like, I would actually, it's effectively a first try at a lot of things that it does, and the amount that it got right first time is just like, it's mind-boggling. I remember Lucas Pope, when he released it, he kind of tweeted out like, hey, the game is sort of done. He was kind of tepid about it, and I understand that anxiety, and that is that if there is just a single piece of logic that is just too hard to get past, that will stop the entire game from being playable for like a vast, wide part of the audience. So the amount he got right first time was fantastic. He's done a lot of the groundwork for us, and it would be fantastic if people did more of that. Some really in-depth Cluedo style, this person was killed by this and this and this. So yeah, that's what I would like to see a little bit more of.
Oh god, there's like 4 questions all at once. At what point can you tell that the scope of your project is too large? How do you limit yourself while presenting enjoyable, interesting gameplay more than once?
For me, I usually don't tell when my project is too large, and that's what happened with Once Upon a Crime in the West, is that we actually overscoped it. We thought, oh, well, it's going to be about the same length. The games are about an hour long each. Once Upon a Crime in the West, more like 90 minutes, but it's very ambitious in that there's more animation, there's more voice work, it's made up of several mini games, like playing the piano and playing cards with people and things like that. It's really ambitious, and we thought, well, it's about the same size. It's just a little bit bigger in scope, so we'll go with it. And then we just we kind of like learned about halfway through that we just had made a horrible mistake, and it was too late now. So I think in my case, I learned how big the project is too big when I hit that point. But I also did just cast a project out of my brain and replace it with a much simpler one, because I suspected that my next project was going to be a bit too big, and I might need to wait for something when we get a little bit of a bigger budget for that. Again, it's just guesswork. But like if you have a prototype and you've got people playing it and the scope is too big for them to really kind of get a feel on it, then you can use some of the advice that I gave you to make some of the answers a little bit more obvious, or you can try and trim it where possible. Sometimes you can just remove a piece of evidence, or combine 2 pieces of evidence, like, oh, there's blood on the floor and there's a hammer with blood on it over there. Just put the bloody hammer in the blood and then there's 1 piece of evidence. You can kind of limit the scope in artificial ways like that.
Cool. Okay, we can continue with questions. What happens is we are at lunchtime right now, so there is an hour, and I am going to open the floor up so that anyone with mics can just talk whatever. People in chat, you can ask questions, interact, have fun, and yeah, just keep going with this. Let me figure out how to set this thing. And while we're at, I wanted to ask one question about testing. How do you test all these mystery things? Because obviously you have to see if people are getting it.
We kind of struggled with that because we have a small scope. But the biggest thing is that get as many friends as you can. Just get them to do what they can, and you and then you have to sort of stagger it, because the problem with these mysteries is that they can only really playtest it once, right? Because once they know the answer, they know the answer. So once you've just got your list of people willing to help you out, just be like, right, okay, for this milestone prototype, I'm going to send it to the following 6 people, and for the next one, I'm going to send it to the next 6, and then you kind of just stagger it a little bit like that. Once Upon a Crime in the West, we didn't get to test it until really, really late, so we didn't get to steer that very hard. But 2001: A Space Felony, we had a prototype early, the 14 evidence version, and then we kind of built from there and just kind of learned things from there. So
cool. Thank you for that talk. Just continue on, like open chat, do whatever you guys need to do, get a snack.
I think I'm going to head off and get myself some lunch.
Yeah, I'm starving.
Gary, before you leave, I love your talk.
Sure. Thanks. Oh, people say, feel free to shoot me a question in DMs. Anyone can do that, and I'm happy to answer that. So let me know. I see people that really want their questions answered in here, and I'm like, oh no, I need to disappear. But like, I'm absolutely happy with answering anything that people come at me with. So thanks for listening.
Is Lucy here?
Ping him on Twitter.
What was his Twitter handle again?
Gosh, somebody made a link for it.
I had to just
Bye.
scroll back. It was Gary. I think it was his name.
I know, but Bye made a link to his Twitter or something.
Oh, it's at Gary J Kings. 1 hour Gary.
Okay.
There it is. Somebody
I got
post
it.
that. Fantastic.
Thank you.